power creep is a term thrown around a lot in the Pokemon community, and it's easy to think of it as just a straight line, a steady increase in power level from the first game until the most recent game, with each new installment introducing power creep. But is that actually true? Is every new game more powerful than the last? Well, not exactly. Sometimes things get so out of hand in Pokemon that in the next game, they do try to decrease the power level and reverse the power creep a little bit, saying, sorry folks, we messed up here. Let's scale this back a little bit. It's not a straight line, it's more of a roller coaster that goes up and down and up again to the moon and then all the way down into the pits of hell. It's all over the place. So I thought it'd be interesting if I ranked every single generation by the amount of power creep they introduced. How significant was the power level increase from the previous game to that game, if there was one at all? And which generation introduced the most significant power increase from the previous installments to it? Now, in this ranking, I'm not going to factor in Uber's formats because I think that's a whole separate conversation. When you factor in stuff like Mega Rayquaza and Zacian Crown and the Primals, that is a massive power spike in Ubers that doesn't necessarily apply to OU. I'm going to mostly talk about competitive singles OU here when I'm speaking about a generation. And I hope that's acceptable. I think it makes sense. So why don't we get right into it? At the very bottom of the list, the lowest amount of power creep in a new installment of the Pokemon series, I think, was actually the first ever new installment in the series, Gen 2. The Gen 2 games are known for having a very low power level, and I would actually say that Gen 2 is a power decrease from Generation 1. Now, Gen 1 is a very limited generation. There's not much in the game, but you could view the power level as being kind of high here, in a weird way. Gen 1 has stuff like its unique interaction with Hyper Beam, where Hyper Beam, if it KOs an enemy, will not need to recharge. That is a pretty powerful attack with a high power that Gen 2 doesn't have. Gen 2 doesn't have high power moves like that. Gen 2 also does not have Amnesia. Amnesia is a move in Gen 1 that increases your special stat by 2, and the special stat serves the purpose of the special attack and defense. It's both stats combined into one. So Amnesia is like doing 2 Calm Mind boosts at once. Even later generations don't have a boost that's that powerful, that just increases your power on your Pokemon that much in a single turn. In Gen 1, if you freeze an enemy, they are just gone forever. You cannot thaw out unless you're hit by a fire move, which pretty much never happens. So freezing an enemy is more powerful, and the most common move that freezes enemies, Blizzard, is also way more powerful. Blizzard has a 120 base power, but 90 accuracy, and a 10% freeze chance. It's an extremely powerful move that even if it existed today would be very powerful. So Gen 1 kind of started at a high power level, and you could say in Gen 2 they decreased the power level. There is no Gen 1 Hyper Beam here. They introduced Steel types to the game, so Normal type is not as spammable and broken, because there's a common and very powerful defensive resistance to it. You could view the addition of Steel type as a sort of power creep, but the result of adding Steel type to the game was more balance overall. Now, Gen 2, you may be thinking, has Snorlax in it, and Snorlax in Gen 2 is infamous for being the most dominant Pokemon in OU history, on literally every single competitive team. And it's true that in the Gen 2 OU metagame, Snorlax is extraordinarily powerful. But it's kind of only powerful relative to everything else. Everything else is so weak that Snorlax is a god. And also, for a Pokemon so dominant, it's not that hard to stop. A lot of things just wall it or prevent it from winning instantly. It's not like Snorlax switches in and you're done, you're finished. It's not like, I don't know, Shell Smash Cloyster in Gen 5 or something, where you give it one wrong turn and the game's over. Snorlax is passive, it's slow, it can curse up, it's really strong, it has a lot of options, but like Skarmory beats it, Cloyster walls it fine, Forretress walls it. There are so many things that wall Snorlax and stop it. It's not actually overwhelmingly powerful or anything, it's just an auto-include because it's the best thing around, and it does all this stuff. But no, Gen 2 does not have a very high power level. In fact, it's a metagame that centers mostly around passive gameplay, with leftovers being everywhere, rest talk being everywhere. There are offensive mechanics in the game, but not that many things use them. Growth is the only special attack boost in the game that just increases your special attack by 1, which is not very strong at all. There's no Dragon Dance yet, there's no Calm Mind yet. Swords Dance is sometimes used, but not that often. It's the occasional belly drum usage, but also not that often. It's mostly Pokemon resting and sleep talking and hitting each other with like thunder. Thunder is maybe the peak of power in Gen 2, and it's not that powerful of a move. It's inaccurate, things can wall it, ground types are immune. So Gen 2 might have the lowest power level of any OU format, and it's an example of a new installment in the series decreasing the power level massively. Up next on the list, I would actually say that Gen 8 OU had a very significant power dip compared to the previous generation. This was not an example of power creep, in fact it was a massive power reset for the franchise. Generation 7 was a chaotic and high power level metagame with a lot of different mechanics happening at once, and we'll go into more detail about that later, but Gen 8 was the first generation in a long time to actually remove a significant amount of content from the game, subsequently resulting in a much lower power level. There is no Mega Evolution anymore, a powerful mechanic that was central to the game in previous generations. There's no Z moves. Powerful moves like Pursuit were removed. Hidden Power was removed from the game. The Tapu Pokemon that were dominant in Gen 7 had their abilities nerfed to deal less damage from terrain. Terrain now gives less of a boost to the subsequent type. Now, there were some things in Gen 8 that you could consider power creep. There was, of course, the generational mechanic Dynamax, which was extraordinarily powerful to a stupid extent, and I suppose if I'm being fair, I should count this as some form of power creep. But weirdly, I feel like this mechanic was so bad and so obviously not appropriate for competitive singles that it's not even real. Like, I don't even view Dynamax as a real thing. When I think of Gen 8, Dynamax doesn't even enter my mind, because it's such a bad idea that was so obviously not appropriate for singles. So, I don't know, maybe it's a bit inconsistent logic there, but it's as if Dynamax just never existed, in my mind. It was so stupid that it's not even a real thing. And every time I say this, Dynamax defenders come out of the woodwork for their 15 minutes of fame. Listen, folks. If you think that Pikachu turning ginormous and getting more health is a creative idea, then I suppose more power to you, but I will disagree with you on that. I would say that me and you disagree, that is a fun game mechanic for a new video game. And we can disagree. We're both humans on Earth, and we're allowed to disagree. Gen 8 also had the infamous Dracovish introduced to the game, one of the most broken Pokemon in history, but it got banned in like 2 seconds. Every gen has, a couple broken guys. There was Galarian, Damanitan. When you look at Gen 8, it was actually not that many ban-worthy Pokemon compared to the past few generations. It really wasn't, and the power level was clearly way lower than it was in the previous generation. So I'd put this very low on the list of games that introduced power creep. This introduced negative power creep. Up next on the list I have Gen 6, and I know what you're thinking, Jimothy. You're crazy. This is the generation that introduced not only Mega Evolutions, but the Fairy type. These are powerful things, aren't they? That's a stupid thing to say, Jim. Gen 6 this low on the list? Now just wait a minute. Because Gen 6, I would argue, is a power decrease compared to the previous generation. Because this was coming off the back of Gen 5, a metagame that we'll get into later, but that was a metagame that had permanent weather in the game, massive power increases with new hidden abilities, the gem items which were swiftly removed from the next installment, and a dragon type that was largely unchecked with no type that was immune to it back then. Gen 5 was a very high power level metagame, and in Gen 6, they completely axed the concept of permanent weather abilities. Drought, drizzle, Sandstream, and Snow Warning no longer permanently create weather on the field. They create temporary weather on the field. That was already a significant power decrease, because permanent weather is really, really strong, and it centers the metagame around it in a way that few things ever have. Now, Gen 6 did introduce Mega Evolutions, and Mega Evolutions are very strong. They have very high stats. They are generally very powerful, like Mega Metagross. It's the strongest Pokemon in OU. But I think that Megas are also sort of balanced in how they are designed, because you can only have one per team, which is a restriction on how many of the broken thing you can run. That inherently makes it more balanced. In Gen 5, the community had to impose restrictions on the broken stuff, like the good old Alderon's proposal, which was a complex ban where you can't have Swift Swim and Drizzle on the same team. Unchecked, all that brokenness was overwhelming. Gems could be used, as many times as you want, resulting in absurdly overpowered hyper offense teams with no checks. In Gen 6, you got 1 Mega. You can clearly see what their Mega is, and also the Mega can't run an item other than a Mega Stone. They have to run the Mega Stone, so they can't be Choice Scarfed, they can't have some surprise. They're just that Mega Pokemon. So it's usually fairly easy to like respond to their Mega and, know what their tools are. There's no underhanded stuff going on. There's nothing crazy. Now, some Megas were too powerful for OU, like Mega Gengar and Mega Kangaskhan, but most Megas were okay. In fact, some Megas kind of sucked and weren't very powerful. So overall, I would say that the Gen 6 metagame with Megas in it, and the new Fairy type and stuff like buffed Knockoff, which was also a massive deal, was still a lower power level format and an overall decrease in power level compared to the previous generation, Gen 5. Now, Knockoff is kind of an important point because Knockoff is one of the most powerful buffs in Pokemon history. Knockoff was buffed in Gen 6 to 65 power with the effect of 1.5x damage while it's removing an item. But I think when you look at it, Knockoff in the Gen 6 metagame feels less central and metagame defining and powerful than Scald was in the Gen 5 metagame. Scald in the Gen 5 metagame warped everything around it in a way that I've scarcely seen before. Whereas Knockoff in Gen 6 had the inherent counterplay of, Megas not being able to be knocked off, and also just didn't feel as powerful as Scald in Gen 5 did. And by the way, Scald is continuously used throughout Pokemon history, so you could view that as Gen 5 power creep having residual impact on later games because of just how strong Scald was. So yeah, I don't think that Gen 6 was a power increase. I think it was, in some ways, there are powerful new mechanics here, but overall the metagame is less powerful than Gen 5's. Up next, I would say Generation 3 OU, my favorite metagame, which I always praise for having a pretty low power level, so shouldn't this be even lower on the list? Well, you have to remember that the generation before this was Generation 2, which is the least powerful OU format, and compared to Generation 2, Gen 3 was a pretty massive step up in the power level. Gen 3 introduced a lot of new mechanics, chief among them probably abilities. Abilities were added to the game, which gave so many more Pokemon so many more things to do. You had Levitation, Sandstream of course, which had a massive metagame impact with permanent weather. You have Guts and Swarm and Torrent and all these abilities that increase damage, so the addition of abilities were a massive power increase. There were also new items, chief among them probably the Choice Band. The Choice Band was a power level increase, granting a Pokemon 1.5x attack at the cost of them having to lock into a move. With the Choice Band, you have fearsome threats like Choice Band Metagross and Aerodactyl and Dugtrio and Tyranitar that didn't exist in Gen 2. There wasn't such immediate offensive pressure in Gen 2. It didn't exist. Gen 3 added this massive offensive item that had a massive impact and is one of the best items in the game to this day. Gen 3 also added massive new strides in boosting technology. Gen 3 added Dragon Dance. Dragon Dance is also, to this day, one of the most commonly used and powerful boosts in the game. It increases attack and speed by 1 stage. And Dragon Dance is an incredible formula to create a win condition throughout Pokemon history. Dragon Dance Tyranitar being the chief abuser of it in Gen 3, as well as Salamence and Gyarados. And there was also the addition of the move Calm Mind, another boost commonly used still today. Calm Mind increases special attack and special defense by 1 stage. A very snowbally boost, because you're increasing your damage output and your bulk at the same time, meaning you're getting more powerful and also becoming harder to defeat all in one. Calm Mind Suicune is infamous in Gen 3 for how difficult it is when it gets out of control and snowballs with too many boosts. Calm Mind Jirachi is excellent, Calm Mind Raikou is very good. Calm Mind was a huge power level increase. There are also higher power moves here in Gen 3, like Mega Horn on Heracross. Mega Horn on Heracross is a great breaking move that wouldn't have existed in Gen 2. There's also Superpower. Not many Pokemon get this, but it was introduced in Gen 3, so you should shout it out here. There's like Regirock with Superpower that's sometimes used. Now, overall, the power level of moves was pretty low still in Gen 3, but it was a step up from Gen 2 for certain. And I think there's also Focus Punch worth shouting out. Another high power move option that is proactive and offensive and punishes the enemy based on predictions. A move that served to add offensive power to the metagame. I think that this power level increase in Gen 3 was very good because Gen 2 was a bit slow, and Gen 3 remedied that with all of this new stuff that increased the pace massively, and that's part of why I like Gen 3, is that it has a good balance of offense and defense, and the offense being so buffed in Gen 3 was a very good thing. Up next, and this may be a hot take, I know that Gen 7 is a powerful metagame, but I would put it around here in terms of the power leap from the previous gen to this gen. Gen 7 introduced a lot of very powerful stuff. The Ultra Beasts, Z moves, the Tapus, Magiana, Ash, Greninja, it was a damn lot. Even the new Ia Papa Berry, which was buffed here inexplicably. It was a massive power increase. You had breaking power never before seen with Tapu Lele Psychic Spam. And, you know, the Katana Tapu Bulu combo in grassy terrain, and generally Ultra Beasts just clicking moves and ramping inherently with the Beast Boost ability. You had Hawlucha with Unburden, who synergizes with all of these terrain seed Pokemon, Tapu Koko, who's really fast and threatening and gives your whole team immunity to sleep for some reason, for goodness sake. Ash Greninja is a stupid Pokemon that I hate and think is dumb, because it's, what if Greninja had a lot more stats? That's all that is, and it's a bit dumb. Magiana was allowed here for some reason, and Magiana has Soul Heart to increase its special attack, its Steel Fairy, it has Shift Gear to boost its speed, it has incredible coverage, Floor Cannon, which is a very powerful move. It was a huge power spike. It definitely was, and Gen 6, by comparison, seems a little bit quaint and sometimes boring. People like Gen 7 for all this chaos, amazingly. I think it might be a bit much, but many do enjoy all this stuff. It's, in a way, a little bit fun. But I do think that there are more significant power spikes that have happened in the franchise. This is one of the bigger ones, but there are bigger ones to come. And I would argue that the power increase from Generation 3 to Generation 4 was actually a more significant power increase than Gen 6 to 7. Gen 4 introduced a pretty massive power spike to the series in many different ways. The first and probably most famous mechanical change in Gen 4 was the physical special split. Prior to Gen 4, moves were physical or special purely based on what type they were. Water-type moves were always special with no exceptions. Bug-type moves were always physical with no exceptions, and every type just had a set physical or special it could be. Ice Punch was special, which seems to not make sense by modern standards, but that's how it was. In Gen 4, they changed that, so every type could be both physical and special. This significantly increased the amount of options Pokemon had, and in some cases was a massive power increase for them. And in one example, it made a Pokemon that was previously fine really, really overpowered. Salamence previously did not have any physical Dragon Stab because such a thing didn't exist. Dragon-type attacks were always special. But now, Salamence had access to Dragon Claw, which was a physical move, and it has a higher physical attack stat. This increased the power of Salamence really significantly. And Salamence also benefited greatly from the addition of the new move Outrage, a physical Dragon-type attack with 120 power. Now that move does lock you into using it for multiple turns and then confuses you at the end, but this is a small price to pay for such a high-powered Dragon-type move, a type that is really spammable, with the only resistance being Steel. So Salamence went from fine to broken in one generation because of this change. Breloom became more powerful with actual grass-type physical moves like Seed Bomb to its name, as well as the new option of Superpower in its move pool. Superpower was widely distributed now. Gyarados is one of the most significantly buffed Pokemon from the physical special split. It was OU last gen, but now it's an A+ threat and one of the best Pokemon in the game, with its access to Stab Physical Waterfall. Previously, it just used Hidden Power Flying for physical stab. Now it has Waterfall, which is way, way better. Tyranitar has a million more options now, with Crunch being a physical move and the elemental punches, Ice Punch and Fire Punch. There's just more options, and a lot of Pokemon just became better as soon as the physical special split hit. And it certainly helped that there were more powerful options to take advantage of for your respective attacking type in this generation. Like Close Combat. Close Combat was a new move in Gen 4, and like I said earlier, Gen 3 didn't really have widely distributed high power moves like this. But Close Combat, with its 120 power and the tiny drawback of losing some defense and special defense, was just a massive power increase for fighting types like Infernape and Lucario. Gen 4 also introduced one of the most powerful mechanics in the whole game that shaped everything as soon as it came out: Stealth Rock. Stealth Rock was a new entry hazard introduced in Gen 4 that deals damage to the enemy based on their weakness to rock. For just one turn, the amount of damage you get from this move over the course of the game is unbelievable, and it severely punishes anything weak to rock. God forbid you have a ×4 weakness to rock, because you're going to lose half of your HP. Stealth Rock was so massive that Gen 4 is infamous for having really insane lead matchups that are all about just getting rocks on the field as early as possible, even if your Pokemon has to die in the process doing that, like Azelf and Aerodactyl. Gen 4 generally introduced more powerful moves to the series. We've already talked about Superpower being more widely distributed. We've talked about Close Combat and Outrage. But there was also Draco Meteor, which is an insane new move that has 140 base power. It has the drawback of lowering your special attack after using it, but that's a small price to pay if you're just hitting and running. You just hit him with a big Draco Meteor and get out of there. Insanely powerful move. We also had more items introduced in this game. Chief among them, Choice Scarf, a staple item from this game forward. Choice Scarf is like the Choice Band, but instead of increasing your attack, it increases your speed at the cost of locking you in. Choice Scarf allowed a formerly slow Pokemon to be fast. It just increased the initiative Pokemon had. It changed the way speed tiers work. It changed everything. Choice Scarf was a huge high-impact item that had a massive metagame impact. Gen 4 also introduced the incredible new move U-Turn to the game, and U-Turn is an attack that pivots you out after being used. This combination of damage and momentum was an unbelievable new addition that is, once again, to this day, one of the most commonly used and strong moves in the game. And I haven't even mentioned all the new powerful items introduced in Gen 4. I referred to Gen 4 as the berry generation because the amount of powerful new berries introduced in Gen 4 was crazy. The Kustap berry, a pinch berry that causes you to move first in your speed bracket on the next turn after being reduced to a certain health threshold, was massive for momentum and initiative. The type berries are staples to this day, reducing incoming damage from super effective hits, each with a respective type. That ability to give you a safety net and a free turn just lends itself to aggressive and faster paced gameplay. It's a power level increase, I would argue. The Life Orb was introduced in Gen 4, an item that increases damage at the cost of some recoil. That's a damn power level increase. The Choice Specs were introduced. Special attacking version of the Choice Band, another staple item. I think that the power level increase from Gen 3 to 4 was enormous, and Gen 3 by comparison feels like a very weak generation. There are no high power moves. Pokemon are using like Brick Break as their best stab, and Hidden Power as their best stab. Giga Drain only has 60 power and 8 PP. There's no Draco Meteor, there's none of this stuff. There's only Choice Band as an offensive item, really. There's no Life Orb or Choice Specs or Choice Scarf or U-Turn or Stealth Rock. There's none of this stuff. The power level increase in Gen 4 was astronomical. And I haven't even mentioned Iron Head Jirachi, but we don't have to mention that. That's okay. That's quite alright. That's not a real thing anyway. What are you talking about? I think Gen 4 was such a big power increase that the ripple effects of all this power creep are still being felt to this day and are so fundamental that we don't remember how impactful they truly were. Gen 4 honestly shaped what modern Pokemon looks like in more ways than I think most people realize. It was Gen 4 that did most of it, for better or for worse. We have now reached the top 2, and up next on the list, I believe that Gen 5 is my choice for number 2 on this list. Even though the power increase in Gen 5 was not as fundamental as that of Gen 4, I think that it was so significant that you gotta put it really high here. I mean, I recently made a video going over every single ban in Gen 5's history, from the beginning to the very end, and it was over an hour long. It's truly unbelievable how difficult to balance and how difficult to manage Gen 5 is because of how massive the power level increase was. I mean, there have been Pokemon bans and mechanic bans as recently as last year in Gen 5. They still have not reached a balanced state that everyone agrees on in this 10-plus-year-old metagame. Gen 5 introduced hidden abilities to the game, new alternative abilities to old Pokemon, and some of these were so massive that they had metagame warping effects beyond imagination. The most significant was giving permanent weather abilities to regular Pokemon that ended up in OU. Politoed got Drizzle, Ninetales got Chlorophyll. Abilities previously only available on Groudon and Kyogre up in Ubers. These were supposed to be mechanics for the big dogs. Now, a little frog can do what Kyogre does. And the impact of that is unbelievable. Permanent Rain is really, really strong. It does so much. It increases the power of water-type attacks, which is a really good type. It synergizes with many different abilities like Swift Swim. The Drizzle Swift Swim combo is broken even in Ubers. You get like Ludicolo as a threat in Ubers among legendaries. So of course it's going to be broken in OU. And that was one of the first things banned, was the combination of Drizzle and Swift Swim. But even without that, you have like permanently accurate Hurricane and Thunder, and just the overwhelming power of water-type damage. You're buffing a type that's already really good. You got Rain Dish Tentacruel, Hydration Vaporeon, Azumarill with Aqua Jet, Gyarados, Keldeo, Scald in general. Rain is insanely good, insanely powerful, and to have it available permanently is unbelievable. I mean, Rain teams are good in modern gens when Rain is temporary. So when it's permanent, it's on another level. The same can be said of Sun. Sun enhances Fire-type damage. It grants Chlorophyll to Venusaur, which was allowed for a very long time, only banned a couple years after Gen 5 was no longer the current gen. You had stall teams that abused Cresselia with Morning Sun. Now, Sun is not in as powerful of a state as it used to be, but that's because of repeated tiering action to decrease its power, because it could abuse Dugtrio and Cresselia and Chlorophyll and all of these mechanics. They've had to do a lot to keep this mechanic in check, and maybe they've overstepped it and made it unviable, nearly. It's used sometimes. There was also, of course, Sand Rush on Excadrill, turning Excadrill, a regular old, non-legendary mole, into one of the strongest things of all time, outrunning everything with incredibly high attack and Swords Dance and perfect offensive physical coverage. Just an absurdly broken Pokemon that took ages to get banned, actually. It dominated. These permanent weather hidden abilities were the most impactful, but there were more than just that. Blaziken received the ability Speed Boost, turning it from an average Pokemon into literally more powerful than most legendaries, and that's not a joke. There was Magic Guard, distributed now to Alakazam, which turned it from an average special attacking psychic type to one of the most impactful Pokemon in the metagame. The new Pokemon Reuniclus also has Magic Guard, and it's been insanely controversial for most of the game's history. Magic Guard is just insanely good, dodging everything in the world. The new ability Regenerator was invented in Gen 5, and it's one of the most powerful abilities ever made. It just heals you for a third of your max HP when you switch out. It is the safest way to heal in Pokemon, and Regenerator Pokemon are infamous for how hard they are to defeat. It's a truly, truly powerful defensive ability. These hidden abilities were crazy, but so were many of the Pokemon introduced in Gen 5. Ferrothorn is one of the strongest Pokemon in history. It's a Gen 5 edition. Ferrothorn immediately took the jobs of, previous Steel-type staples like Skarmory and Forretress, with its insane combination of typing, stats, utility, and ability that deals chip damage. Ferrothorn just does everything in one package, completely siphoning all of the roles that other steel types had and taking all of that for itself. Excadrill was a future staple. Landorus Therian was, of course, added in Gen 5, considered by some to be the greatest competitive Pokemon of all time. This is a Gen 5 Pokemon. And the new gem items, which only exist in Gen 5, were also insanely broken. The gem items were corresponding to every type in the game, and they granted 1.5x damage to a move of that type once in their consumable. They're kind of like Z moves in a beta form, but they are even more powerful because there's no limit on how many you could use. And people figured out eventually that hyper offense teams that spammed these gem items were nearly unstoppable, because gems kind of allow you to bypass usual checks. They enhance damage so much that like a Shell Smash Cloyster or a Quiverance Volcarona could just use a gem to power through any check it can think of. It can just choose which check to beat, and then the enemy is completely blind to how to defeat these guys. And if every Pokemon in the team has a gem, how the hell do you defeat all of them? They're all just powering through. It's maybe short-term value, only working on one attack, but if every Pokemon has that, it's gonna just eat you alive. And it did exactly that. It ate teams alive. Speaking of Quiverance and of powerful, controversial Pokemon introduced in Gen 5, Volcarona was introduced in this gen, a Pokemon that would be famously broken for many gens to come. With its fantastic stats, great offensive bug fire typing, and Quiver Dance, an insanely powerful new boosting move, which is a move that increases special attack and special defense and speed in one turn. It's like Calm Mind and Dragon Dance all in one. A ridiculous combination that, Volcarona can take advantage of to sweep entire teams in just one turn of setup sometimes. It's crazy. Shell Smash was also introduced in Gen 5, and Shell Smash is another absurd boosting move that increases attack, special attack, and speed by 2 stages at the cost of -1 defense and special defense. Another boost that can eat you alive in a single turn. And many believe this to be the most powerful boost in Pokemon history for how immediately game-ending it is, and Shell Smash Cloyster was an insane threat that recently had to be banned for many, many years of crimes against humanity. I also spoke earlier about the impact of Scald to the game, one of the most powerful moves ever invented. Scald is an 80 power, water-type attack with a 30% chance to burn. Such a spammable, safe move, especially in a world with permanent rain. And I think this move is the reason Burn ended up being nerfed in later games, because Scald spam was such a problem that they had to nerf Burn to be a little bit less impactful. And there's probably more that I could talk about in Gen 5, examples of power increase that I'm just not thinking of right now because there was so many examples that it's hard to describe all of them succinctly here. I think I've touched on the big ones, but Gen 5 was an unbelievable increase in power. But I do think that there's one gen that had an even more significant increase in power from the previous to it, and that is, of course, the current generation, Gen 9 OU. After Gen 8 was a nice power reset, and a bunch of broken stuff was removed, and everything felt reasonable and balanced again, in Gen 9 they said, you know what? Screw that, we're going back to chaos. It's Gen 5 OU all over again, folks. We're going right back to complete absurdity. Let's introduce every broken thing we've ever thought of into one game, why don't we? Where to even begin? Probably with the flagship mechanic of the game, terrestrialization, which, unlike Dynamax, was not so clearly overpowered that it ended up banned. There was a vote to ban it, and the community voted to preserve this mechanic. And in doing so, terrestrialization has completely defined the experience of Gen 9 OU. Terrestrialization is a mechanic that allows you, once per game, to transform into another type. And any Pokemon can do this. They have a preset Terra type, and they are able to transform into that type at a certain point. It's like ulting. Once you do that, you gain stab damage for the new type, and you also keep the stab damage that you had on your previous types. So if Blaziken terrestrializes water, it still has fire and fighting damage from its previous typing, but it also has water type stab. And if you terrestrialize as a type that you already are, you gain double stab damage on that type, which is very good. It's kind of like a gem from Gen 5, except guess what? The power boost is permanent. You get that Terra boost permanently, and you get the defensive benefit of becoming the new type. It's offense and defense in one, and it's insanely good. Now, unlike Dynamax, there is a bit more nuance to the Terra mechanic with more ways to use it. You can use it offensively and defensively, and to get one free turn for whatever reason. You can Terra to gain an immunity. You can Terra to spin block by becoming a ghost type. There's all sorts of ways to use it. But, surprise, surprise, guess what the most common usage of Terra is? It's to increase how much damage you deal. Usually Pokemon just Terra to the same type they already are to get more stab damage and deal more damage. How surprising. So the end result of Terra is making strong Pokemon even stronger, and it's a significant power level increase really across the board, and it makes the rich get richer. Another thing that Terra is used for is to earn a free turn on a setup sweeper, because you can terrestrialize, gaining new defensive properties, also gaining stab damage on a new coverage move, and getting a completely free turn to set up a boost. And that has broken many previously fine setup sweepers. Volcarona is banned to Uber because it is insanely good at abusing Terra. Terra has had an untold impact on the game, making boost sweepers even more powerful, making Pokemon that spam stab moves even more powerful, making defensive behemoths even more powerful. So that's probably the most significant change in Gen 9 that has upended everything. Gen 9 has also had more Pokemon bans that aren't legendaries, like regular Pokemon getting banned, than any other generation I've ever seen. Now, I said before that the Gen 5 ban video was over an hour, and that's a decade plus worth of bans to cover. The Gen 9 ban video I made is even longer, and Gen 9 isn't even over yet. It's only been a couple of years. I believe Gen 9 has more bans than any OU format ever. Partially that's because Terra turns previously fine Pokemon into game-breaking threats like Volcarona and Regieleki. But also they just introduced a bunch of really powerful new Pokemon to the game. Now some were obviously broken, like Chi-Yu and Chien-Pao, who are legendaries. You can expect a legendary to be really broken. But then there's Palafin, who's a little dolphin, who for some reason you switch out and then he turns into a damn legendary with the move Jet Punch, 60 power, water priority, insane stats, insane attack stat. That's just a regular Pokemon you can catch in the game. It's not a legendary or anything. There is Espathra, a mere emu that for some reason gets the unbelievable combination of speed boost, calm mind, and stored power. This is Gen 5 Blaziken, but better here. Annihilape is a new evolution for Primeape that has the unbelievable signature move Rage Fist, a ghost type move that scales by 50 base power every time you are hit, and can quickly achieve over 200 base power, which is just stupid. There are the Paradox Pokemon, which are Pokemon from the ancient past and distant future, many of which are banned because they're insane. Fluttermane is ancient Misdreavus from the past. Why did they give this the stats of Mewtwo? Has 135 special attack, special defense, and speed, plus the ability Photosynthesis, boosting its highest stat in the sun, or if a booster energy item is used and consumed. Plus it's a ghost fairy type, plus it has all the moves you can imagine. Ridiculous Pokemon. Iron Bundle is Robot Delibird, which for some reason is more powerful than most legendaries we've ever seen in our lives. It's insanely fast, threatening, and for some reason bulky too. And it has perfect offensive coverage and pivoting and everything in the entire world. They made Robot Delibird stronger than anything you've ever seen for some reason here. They've got Gouging Fire, who is past Paradox Entei, who's really broken. Roaring Moon is past Salamence. It's got Dragon Dance knockoff, Acrobatics, Booster Energy combo. It's got it all. The new pseudo-legendary Baxcalibur is immune to being burned, has unbelievable stats, has Dragon Dance, it can Terastallize, surprise, surprise, that's really broken. So just a really massive influx of incredibly powerful Pokemon. Also an influx of incredibly powerful new moves. I've already spoken about Rage Fist, which is what made Annihilape so dominant, but, you know, if one new Fishious Rend wasn't enough, what about another one? Last Respects has a similar effect, a ghost move that increases by 50 power for each fainted ally, turning this funny dog into the most broken thing imaginable. This move can achieve 300 base power if your Pokemon is the last on a team, which will literally sweep everything unless you have a normal type, because resistance doesn't matter at that point when the move is that strong. Its Fishious Rend levels are ridiculous. The new move Shed Tail was added to the game. Shed Tail is a move that subtracts half of your HP, and then substitutes and baton passes that substitute to a teammate. So you have substitute and baton pass in one. You pivot to a teammate and give them a completely free safety net against status and incoming damage. And they gave this to the Pokemon Cyclizar, who has Regenerator and is very fast. So you could do this and then switch out, immediately healing yourself with Regenerator, and just do that repeatedly to get free turns galore. And then they banned Cyclizar and Orthworm started doing it. Orthworm, new Pokemon, started shed-tailing and going insane with offensive teams, giving them free turns to Dragon Dance and Terastallize. Gen 9 also introduced some insanely good new abilities. Goldengo is one of the most hated new Pokemon in the game. It's already a pretty solid guy with Steel Ghost typing, one of the best type combos you can get, and a respectable special attack, but its ability Good as Gold is maybe the strongest ability Pokemon has ever seen. Good as Gold makes you completely immune to all status moves, including just about every non-attacking move that targets the enemy, like Trick and Defog and Will-O-Wisp and Thunderwave and anything you can imagine. Goldengo is immune to most of the game, it feels like. And Goldengo is of course the first Pokemon that can ever block Defog from happening, which has made hazard strategies incredibly powerful. Gargantuan has the ability Purifying Salts, which grants immunity to being statused by status effects and also grants ghost resistance. And that's another one of the most powerful abilities we've ever seen. Many of the new metagame staples are really powerful as well, like Iron Valiant, who is an excellent fairy fighting type with every coverage move you can imagine, mixed attacking stats, and that excellent booster energy to increase its speed with a consumable item, extraordinarily strong. Ogerpon Wellspring is currently a very controversial Pokemon, one of the new legendaries. With its high stats and powerful stab IV cudgel, an exclusive item that just increases damage by 1.2x, which is also really good. There is an untold amount of power level increase in Gen 9, rivaling that of Gen 5, especially coming off the back of a gen that was a big power reset. I mean, Gen 8 is one of the biggest power dips in the series in a long time, and then they went right back up to the damn peak of the mountain in Gen 9, introducing a massive truck worth of complete nonsense. Gen 9 is far from a balanced state. There is still much to be frustrated with in this metagame. The inherent variance that Terra introduces to things and the way that just shifts everything around it is controversial. Some like it, some hate it, but it's undeniable how powerful and impactful it is. Almost comparable to the impact of permanent weather, I would say. Terra has had that much of an impact. So I think that the most recent generation, Gen 9, is the biggest example of power creep in the entire series, especially considering how low the power level was comparatively in Gen 8. It is interesting, though, to look back and see how the power level has fluctuated in Pokemon over the years. It's easy to think of it as just a straight line up, but that's not true. There's been peaks and valleys, with the highest peak being the most recent game. I think people forget that the power level has actually been kind of all over the place historically. So I wonder if Gen 10 will be another power reset, or if they will turn it up to 11 and give the Pokemon Caterpie light that burns the sky or something. I don't know what they'll do, but only time will tell, I suppose. Now, some argue that power creep is inevitable in long-running franchises, and that it's a good thing, in fact, to keep things fresh so that you don't have the same Pokemon dominating over and over. And I agree with that to an extent, for sure. But I do think it depends on how the power creep is handled. And I know competitive singles is not the format they balance around. But I definitely don't love the design of brute forcing mechanics into the center of things and making the game all about them. I do prefer when competitive games, and games in general, just find a metagame on their own. They evolve on their own. It does feel like sometimes they force these things into the forefront and jam them into our faces and make the metagame about them, even though it is more interesting when a metagame evolves on its own, in my opinion. But what do you think? What would your approach be to managing the power level of Pokemon? How would you design things in the next installment? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you very much for watching.